Every day, thousands of freight trains travel the rails of North America. While many regularly scheduled runs continue to serve industries all over the continent, a great many more operations have faded into the history books with the passage of time. Welcome back to the Following a Freight Train series, where we follow a regularly scheduled freight train over the course of its typical operations. Today's episode marks the first freight train we will examine as part of this series that no longer operates. In fact, much of the route over which it once ran has been shut down pending an uncertain future. While this may not have been the most scenic rail line or the longest trip distance-wise, it was a train and railroad steeped in a rich history that dates back to the famed Milwaukee Road and even further. It once carried freight, 20 cars at a time, up one of the steepest railroad grades in North America behind a pair of vibrantly painted red and white SD70 ACE locomotives. At long last, we are finally going to look at Tacoma Rail Train number 101, known affectionately as the Hill Job. For this adventure, we return once again to the Pacific Northwest, beginning in the city of Tacoma, Washington. Tacoma is a major port town along Puget Sound and a major railroad hub in the region. The freight rail carrier this time, rather than a Class 1 operation, is a local short line outfit known as the Tacoma Municipal Belt Line, or Tacoma Rail for short. Unlike the vast majority of freight operators, Tacoma Rail is owned as a public utility of the city of Tacoma. The company traces its roots to the old Tacoma Beltline interurban electric railroad, which started up around the turn of the last century. In the recent past, the railroad featured three main operating divisions. The Tidelands Division remains as the busiest portion of Tacoma Rail operations, serving the port of Tacoma. This is an around-the-clock operation with trains constantly moving about the yard on their way to and from various transloading facilities at the port. The second division, known as the Lakewood Division, serves industries in between South Tacoma and DuPont with one train per week in each direction. Last but not least is a piece of railroad known as the Mountain Division. At its height, Tacoma Rail's Mountain Division covered approximately 100 miles of track branching out to the south from Tacoma. This system can be viewed as three separate branch lines all meeting up in the community of Frederickson, Washington. The T-line, which is the focus of this video, connected Tacoma and Frederickson by way of a 12-mile-long rail line up the steep 3.8% grades of the Tacoma Gulch and across Tacoma's Midland district. Linking Frederickson with the former Northern Pacific, now BNSF Railway, mainline in Chehalis, Washington, was the C-line. The third branch, known as the M-line, ran from Frederickson to Morton, Washington through the foothills of Mount Rainier. A portion of this line has been used by the Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad for steam-powered tourist train excursions since 1980. This network of rail lines traces its origin to the Tacoma Eastern Railroad, which was chartered in 1891 to bring timber from the Midland area down the steep Tacoma Gulch, sometimes called the Hill, and into the port of Tacoma. Originally a 30-inch narrow-gauge railroad, the line was later upgraded to the North American standard gauge of 4 feet 8.5 inches. Eventually, the Milwaukee Road, which was building a transcontinental rail line between Chicago and the Puget Sound region, took interest in the Tacoma Eastern as a way of expanding its operations south from Tacoma. The Milwaukee took control of the Tacoma Eastern in 1909, using the route to access the Northern Pacific Main Line in Chehalis. From there, Milwaukee Road would gain trackage rights over the Northern Pacific to reach Portland, Oregon. In addition to this, the Morton branch proved to be fairly lucrative for the Milwaukee Road from early on, when Weyerhaeuser Timberlands Corporation contracted the railroad to haul lumber to the port of Tacoma. The Milwaukee Road would go on to operate the former Tacoma Eastern rail lines for over 70 years until the railroad ended service on all portions of its Pacific extension in March of 1980. From there, the Weyerhaeuser Timberlands Corporation purchased the railroad and continued to operate it as part of their Chehalis Western Railroad up until July of 1992. The Chehalis Western would haul timber from loadout sites to the port of Tacoma for export and domestic use. Following the shuttering of the Chehalis Western, Weyerhaeuser sold the line to the city of Tacoma for $3.1 million in 1995. That same year, Tacoma contracted with a new private operator running once again under the Tacoma Eastern name to provide freight services along the line between Tacoma and Frederickson. The main customer was the Boeing manufacturing plant in Frederickson, which had just opened 3 years prior in 1992. The new Tacoma Eastern operated the branch for just shy of 4 years, with Tacoma Rail taking over on November 16th of 1998. Today's video covers the train that Tacoma Rail ran for nearly a quarter of a century between Tacoma and Frederickson. This train went by the official name of Job 101, but was frequently also known as the Boeing Job or the Hill Job. Tacoma Rail ran this train twice each week in each direction between Tacoma and Frederickson to serve many different businesses in the Frederickson area. Due to declining customers and considerable expense to maintain and run trains over the hill south of Tacoma, the city opted to sell the portion of the rail line outside of the city limits to another short-line rail carrier known as Rainier Rail. Rainier Rail continued to serve Frederickson businesses using the branch from Chehalis, while Tacoma shuttered the line up the hill pending future use. Some ideas for repurposing the line have included future passenger rail services or conversion to a rail trail. Although the last runs of Job 101 have come and gone, it is still a worthwhile experience to see this train in action and learn of its importance to the region. We will now go back in time to follow the Tacoma Rail Hill Job. A typical day up Tacoma Rail's Mountain Division would begin at the Tacoma Rail Municipal Yard located in East Tacoma along Washington State Highway 509. This is the main yard and shop complex for Tacoma Rail operations. All of the mixed freight or manifest traffic that is interchanged with Tacoma Rail from BNSF Railway and Union Pacific is sorted in this classification yard. Locomotive maintenance for Tacoma Rail's diesel locomotive fleet is done in-house at the engine servicing facilities located on the south side of the yard. On this particular day, the crew for the Hill Job, train number 101, was already on duty and beginning to put their train together for the trip to Frederickson. The Hill Job operated 2 days per week in each direction. Uphill trips from Tacoma to Frederickson were typically made on Sundays and Wednesdays, while downhill trips were run on Mondays and Fridays, or sometimes Tuesdays and Thursdays. Usually, the train crew would report for duty at 7 a.m. for the uphill run. Motive power for the trains was in the form of 2 Progress Rail SD70 ACE-P4 diesel-electric locomotives, numbers 7001 and 7002. These were originally demonstrator units that were leased to Tacoma Rail beginning in 2014, specifically for use on the Mountain Division. The middle axle on each truck of these units does not have a traction motor, making for a total of 4 powered axles on each locomotive. This is the reasoning for the P4 as part of the locomotive model number. With the train fully assembled, it was time for the trip to Frederickson to begin. There is no direct connection between Tacoma Rail's Muni Yard and the Mountain Division, so, in order to proceed on its southbound journey, the Hill Job made a long reverse move before heading to Frederickson. The train would back out of Muni Yard and around the south leg of the Y at a location on the railroad known as Bullfrog Junction. From there, the Hill Job continued to back the train under Highway 509 and Interstate 5, finally coming to a stop in Union Pacific's Fife Yard at Tacoma Junction. This would mark the beginning of the train's journey over former Milwaukee Road trackage. Once the switch was thrown, the train would proceed forward, crossing the 1917 vintage railroad bridge over the Puyallup River and then above both Union Pacific and BNSF Railway main lines through Tacoma. From this point, the Hill Job would traverse a very short stretch of the Sound Transit Lakewood subdivision before reaching the big climb out of Tacoma on the Mountain Division. On a summer morning in August of 2022, the Tacoma Dome station can be seen from East 26th Street. Located in the old Milwaukee Road freight depot, this station has served Sounder commuter trains since the early 2000s and has also played host to the Amtrak Cascades and Coast Starlight passenger train services since November of 2021. The historic Freighthouse Square complex is also home to several different businesses as well as Sound Transit's T-Line light rail. In 2017, Sound Transit completed major upgrades to this rail corridor, replacing the landmark Milwaukee Road S-curve single-track wooden trestle built in 1937 with a brand new double-track concrete bridge. This paved the way for the eventual reroute of Amtrak trains on their journeys between Seattle and Portland along a more direct route by way of Lakewood and South Tacoma. Today, this stretch of railroad between Tacoma and DuPont is known as Sound Transit's Lakewood subdivision. Sound Transit even paid homage to the heritage of this rail line with Milwaukee Road heralds adorning both sides of the bridge over 26th Street. After a little bit of waiting, the hill job eased its way onto the Lakewood subdivision and across the new concrete bridge. The train had just crossed over at Portland Avenue from the far track, which continues onto the Lakewood subdivision, to the close track, which will become the Mountain Division just beyond Freighthouse Square. Frequently, the hill job would have to wait short of the crossovers at Portland Avenue for one of the many Amtrak or Sounder passenger trains to clear. As the train left Freighthouse Square and the Lakewood subdivision behind, it made a sharp turn to the south on the Mountain Division, beginning the steep climb up the 3.8% grade through the Tacoma Gulch. Closing in on the top of the grade, the train's speed dropped significantly as it approached the 46th Street grade crossing. Even with a relatively short train, the locomotives struggled to move the tonnage up the grade. These trains were seldom longer than 20 cars. For larger loads, the crew would frequently take some of the cars up to the top of the grade first before heading back down the hill to bring up a second set, or cut, of cars. This practice is frequently referred to in railroading as doubling the hill. At 56th Street, the hill job had crested the summit, continuing to pass through Tacoma's East Side neighborhood. The rail line enters Tacoma's Midland neighborhood as it diagonals to the southeast and crosses 72nd Street and McKinley Avenue. This location marks the end of the first of 3 passing sidings following the summit. The second siding, located just past the double crossing at the intersection of 72nd and McKinley, was frequently used for dropping off the first set of cars when the hill job would double the hill. On this particular day, the crew did just that, returning back down the grade to pick up a second set of cars. Back at the bottom of the hill, locomotives 7002 and 7001 approached Freighthouse Square on the tail of a weekend Sounder Mariners baseball special event train. The Sounder train was holding short of the Portland Avenue crossovers to allow Amtrak's southbound Coast Starlight Train 11 to pass by. Once the Starlight was through and the railroad dispatcher repositioned the switch, the Sounder train proceeded to Seattle. With Sounder out of the way, the two locomotives continued in the direction of Union Pacific's Fife Yard to pick up the second section of the train. After retrieving the remaining cars and returning up the hill, the train was combined once again for the rest of the trip to Frederickson. Coming around a big curve in Midland, the hill job turned to the south with its full train in tow, passing an abandoned spur to a long ago closed industry. Leaving Midland behind, the hill job continued to follow the rails of the former Milwaukee Road, passing through the backyards of Allison. As the train approached the military road crossing, it neared the end of its journey, with Frederickson less than a mile away. The train came to a stop on the grade into town just short of the Y at Alred Junction. This was the point where the branch line to Morton split off from the Milwaukee Road main line to Chehalis. At one time, Tacoma Rail ran trains to both McKenna on the line to Chehalis and Morton on the Morton branch. The suburb of Frederickson is home to approximately 25,000 people. Boeing is one of the biggest employers in the area and a large part of the reason behind this line's continued existence. A variety of rail cars are dropped off here every week with parts for the manufacture of various airplane components, including wings. A number of other businesses are served by the railroad in the Frederickson Industrial Park as well as elsewhere in Frederickson. Carlisle Construction, a company that produces roofing and other construction materials, receives tank cars. Centerbeam flats with various finished lumber products can frequently be seen spotted at Parr Lumber's transloading facility. The James Hardy Company, producing siding materials for buildings, takes both centerbeam flat cars and covered hopper cars. In addition to these, gondola cars are often dropped off for Harris Rebar, which produces steel rebar and other products for reinforcing concrete. Finally, a large transloading facility sits to the southwest of Frederickson, providing Medallion Foods with cylindrical covered hopper cars. Although Tacoma Rail no longer serves these businesses, Rainier Rail operates trains a few days each week between Chehalis and Frederickson. The company now owns the Mountain Division as far north as the 72nd Street crossing, which marks the city limits of Tacoma. Back in December of 2022, the hill job rested prior to the beginning of the day's work. Of particular interest was Tacoma Rail Locomotive 3001 filling in for SD70 ACE 7001, which was out of service for a 90-day inspection. The 3001 was an SD40 locomotive converted from an SD45, a rare sight on the hill job following the lease of the SD70s. Typically, the train would depart Frederickson shortly before noon en route to Tacoma. On this particular day, however, the train did not depart until after dark due to track work. A fresh blanket of snow covered the city of Tacoma and surrounding suburbs on Friday, December 31, 2021. Slowly rolling along, a very short two-car hill job made its way downgrade to Tacoma, passing under the 43rd Street Bridge. At the bottom of the grade, the hill job rumbled through Freighthouse Square as it headed for Fife and ultimately Tacoma Rail Muni Yard. The short train disappeared around the bend at Portland Avenue, bringing its trip over the Tacoma Rail Mountain Division to a close. On May 14th and 15th of 2023, the last regular runs up and down the hill for Job 101 were made. One final partway run to exchange extra cars with Rainier Rail occurred on May 26th. With the last runs of the hill job in the books, Tacoma Rail no longer needed locomotives 7001 and 7002. Following the conclusion of their lease, the locomotives left Tacoma for the last time on November 3rd of 2023, destined for their new home on the Arkansas and Missouri Railroad. Although the rails of the old Tacoma Eastern no longer sing out as heavy freight trains make their way through Tacoma Gulch, they served both the city and the region dutifully for over 130 years. Now, once again, the railroad has fallen quiet, this time possibly for good. Fortunately, Rainier Rail continues to provide a vital rail link to the Frederickson area for the time being. And as for the hill, no matter what happens, it will always live on in the hearts and minds of those fortunate enough to experience firsthand the roar of diesel locomotives in full throttle as they powered their way up the grade and into history. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Following a Freight Train. For more information on Tacoma Rail, visit tacomarail.com. As always, a special thanks to all my supporters on Patreon. If you enjoy the Following a Freight Train series and would like to see more episodes in the future, let me know in the comments section. To receive notifications every time I post to YouTube, click on the subscribe button and select the Receive All Notifications option by ringing the bell. There's even more train and railroad-themed content on my other social media pages, and remember to stop by every Friday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific Time for a brand new railroading adventure right here on the YouTube channel. That's it for now. Until next time, I'm Mike Armstrong. I'll see you down the line. Thanks for watching.